My wife hates snakes, and when I rewatch this episode with her, she's going to scream so loud during that first scene. It's going to be a riot. I'm really looking forward to it. Let's talk about Perry Mason, episode 4. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I'm doing weekly reviews of this show, Doom Patrol, and I'm going to be starting out to review Brave New World and Cursed, and if I feel particularly industrious, potentially The Alienist, Season 2, Angel of Darkness. So if you're interested in any of that, please consider subscribing, and if you'd give me a like, I'd really appreciate it. Let's talk about Perry Mason, episode 4, with spoilers, and right off the top, biggest thing I think that people will be talking about after this episode is the death of John Lithgow's E.B. Burchard, and we haven't seen the body yet, so it's a little bit inconclusive at the moment, but I have to imagine that after this build-up, he is going to turn out dead, and he is actually making a somewhat noble decision, because earlier in this episode, we see him pushing Emily Dodson to plead guilty because he's in this position where he knows if he continues to defend her that Maynard Baines is going to use the evidence against him that he took money from clients in the past to have him disbarred, and he is trying to get her to plea out so that he doesn't have to do that, but he realizes that he can't go through with it. And that scene between him and Emily Dodson was just very, very well acted by John Lithgow. If he wanted to submit this episode for an Emmy or a Golden Globe, I think he should totally be nominated for either of those awards for this performance. It's really great acting by one of my personal favorite character actors on television, and he really just nails this scene. You see this episode scenes with each of the characters on his team. He has touching moments with Della and with Perry, where Perry is helping him put on his shoes and unplugging the phone, and you see that there's kind of this father-son or mentor-mentee relationship there, and you even see shades of that someday Perry Mason could turn into Burchard. You see this with the shoes, where he says, "Oh, I slept in my shoes and it's causing me this pain," and Mason's like, "I wouldn't know about that," and kind of hinted to me that there are similarities between the two, and someday maybe Mason will turn into Burchard, which if you've watched the series, you know he sort of does, although obviously he's a lot more competent than it seems that Burchard ever was. But I found the hummingbird feeder and that aspect that he just left the food there for the hummingbirds, I found that really quite touching, and just the resignation with which he accepted his fate, and that he's doing this to make sure that Emily doesn't have to plead guilty when that would be the best thing for him, and she might not get off anyway, seeing as the case against her looks pretty grim. When the district attorney wants you to go away, it's kind of hard to beat that. And I'm gonna miss John Lithgow's presence in this show. If he truly is gone, I feel like they had a particularly distinctive speech pattern for him. I thought his dialogue was priceless. I particularly liked his exchanges in this episode with Maynard about the police detectives, the tactics they used to try and coerce a confession out of Emily Dodson. I thought that their exchanges were just really, really well acted. They had a ton of chemistry as actors, and it's a shame that we won't get to see more of it. But as I said in previous episodes, I'm ready for Perry Mason and the other characters to step up. And this episode, we got to see a lot more of Tatiana Maslany's sister Alice and her mother, played by Lili Taylor. And it was interesting because I read one reviewer who said that there was almost a parallel, and I kind of see this between what's going on with Sister Alice and what's going on with Burchard in this episode, because with both of them, you see them being tempted to kind of put aside what they believe is right in order to do what's easiest for them. Because you see in this episode that Robert Patrick and the elders of this church are going to shut off the purse strings, if Sister Alice doesn't stop saying what they view as heresy. And she, for a moment there before the crowd, is strongly considering not going through with it and not continuing with her what she believes are revelations, but obviously it seems are the result of seizures, that she's going to resurrect the Dodson boy. And they've also, just told her she has to abandon her support for Emily Dodson. And that moment when the person comes through the crowd and says, I have this clothing for the baby when, you resurrect him, that was the moment where she realized that she couldn't, betray what she believed God was telling her. And she decided, I'm going to continue with speaking out about my visions. And I think it's just this sign that this person has this faith in her that she can't ignore. She feels like she has to live up to people's faith in her. And Tatiana Maslany is killing it in this performance. I really, really love her acting. I think she's easily my second favorite character in the show besides Perry Mason at the moment. I'm really, really enjoying the acting that she's doing, and I think that it's interesting, but she seems like she's a really, really sincere character. Now, obviously, I think her religious convictions are misguided. I really appreciate her character. The scene with the snakes was very, very surreal. I was a little bit taken aback by it. I thought it must be like a vision sequence or something. There's no way someone would actually dump snakes on her, but then they had Lili Taylor saying that they needed to redouble security around Sister Alice, so I guess that actually happened. The show doesn't really seem to have any limitations on the crazy things that religious people will do. And in fairness, religious people will do some pretty crazy things. I'm a religious person myself, and I fully acknowledge that oftentimes religious people, like I said, do crazy things. Not going to go further into that. But this episode, Perry Mason kind of took a back seat, I would argue, to Burchard and to Sister Alice, but he still had some interesting moments. Obviously, Fatty Arbuckle caught up to him in a phone booth while he was on the phone with his son. That's probably the worst thing to happen to him this episode, is he got a little bruised by it, but he got laid in the bargain and seemed relatively well recovered, so can't say that this episode was as harsh for him as some other episodes have been. I liked how the investigation continues. I loved the scenes between him and Shea Whigham's character and Virgil, the poor person in charge of conducting autopsies. I'm getting the sense that it's not really particularly pleasant to be a friend of Perry Mason, but I loved the ribbing that they gave Virgil for his not too subtle fantasy about being a tiny man that would get put inside a lady's purse, and him expressing this kind of sentiment that, oh, I kind of understand these strange fantasies that Fatty Arbuckle has. So I really liked the way that they kind of pushed him into this corner and were like, you need to do this, and then they left the body on the golf course so that he would have a second chance at an autopsy. So it's going to be interesting to see how this evidence gets introduced. I feel like that's going to be challenging, because it is like, how do you possibly introduce this evidence once there's been an autopsy already, and how do you explain the teeth without bringing Paul Drake into it? So this is going to be quite a legal challenge for Perry Mason. The odds are still not in his favor if he takes over the case, which I imagine is what's going to happen. I think that's what we all expect to happen. And big revelation for Della this episode is that she is a closeted lesbian. And of course she is, because this show has to make sure that it gets its representation. I don't want to sound like one of those people that complains about SJW this and SJW that, but there definitely was an effort to make every member of the trilogy, with the exception of Perry Mason, we've still got to have our straight white male lead in all of these shows, no matter how much diversity we squeeze in the background. But they made this concerted effort to give him, a black partner, and a lesbian partner, just to make sure we're crossing all the X's and dotting all the I's. I don't really care about it. I just don't think it really impacts the character. I think they could have left Della's sexuality completely ambiguous, and it wouldn't really have affected the character because it's not really relevant to her as a career professional. And this is honestly true with Perry Mason as well. They could have honestly left his sexuality ambiguous. They could have not really shown us anything about his backstory. I mean, the World War I flashbacks, as cool as they were, aren't really informing a lot of our understanding of him as a character in most of these episodes. So a lot of this backstory is, I feel like, prestige television standard form, you know, like we do this in prestige television, but I don't know that they've really considered why they're doing it. I think that I read a really good review where someone pointed out that part of the appeal of Perry Mason was always that he was just good at his job. We didn't need to know his backstory. We didn't need to know anything about him or Della or Paul Drake outside of the office and outside how good they were at their job. That was hardly the point of their characters. And I'm not saying it makes this a worse show. I'm just saying it's not really necessary to making it a good show. But rabbit trail aside, I really did enjoy this episode. I think that the characterizations continue to deepen. I liked the scene where Perry Mason confronted Detective Ennis, played by Andrew Howard, who someone informed me in the comments section is actually another actor from Wales, which amazing how these actors from Wales, Matthew Rhys and Andrew Howard, are pulling off these perfect American accents. I mean, it's not the most impressive of their acting skills, but I never would have guessed with either of them unless I had looked at their Wikipedia bios. So kudos to both of them for doing that so well. I usually can pick up on slight discrepancies when I'm listening to someone trying to fake an American accent, but not with either of them. I mean, even Nicole Kidman, I hear her slip up now and then, but not with either of them. Their accents are perfect. Didn't get to see Paul Drake this episode, kind of missed him. Hopefully we get to see more of him next episode. Seems like it from the trailer. There were some spoilers in the trailer, but they didn't show John Lithgow's character, so I'm assuming he's dead. Either that or they're just hiding him. Sometimes HBO has played pretty coy with these kinds of things in trailers, hiding major events or major twists, as they did with True Detective Season 2 and the fate of Colin Farrell's character. So those are my thoughts. Really enjoying this show. Looking forward to next week's episode. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of this and other shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, you can watch more videos right now.